I'm the expert. I am still on the same journey that you are on, no matter where you are in your journey of faith. If you're just starting out or kind of exploring it, or maybe you've been in this whole kind of church thing and been in faith for a long period, or maybe your entire life, we are all just kind of on the same journey together. So what I'm sharing with you today, quite frankly, comes out of my own experience of just learning, what does it even mean to follow Jesus? What does it mean to have a relationship with an invisible God? Because if I can be honest with you, that's a little bit odd. We don't have relationships with invisible things normally, and yet as followers of Jesus, we claim to have this incredible personal relationship with an invisible God. And so I'm on that journey, and I'm just here to share this morning some things that I've learned along the way. Here's what I'd love to do to start off with. Daniel, I need your help. I have a hose in the back and a watering can. Would you mind grabbing that for me while I explain to people? We're going to dive into this topic called soul care, which I define like this: is tending to the garden of your inner life, okay? So today, I want to give you one gardening tip. Now, what would be really cool, and I don't think this is even possible, Daniel, is there a tap close by? I looked at John because you're a landscaper extraordinaire, so to hook the hose up to? No, probably not. That's probably beyond. There is. Would it be long enough though to get it back in here? Okay. Right. This is working out. Well, I'll keep the can. Yeah, we'll need that in here. But the hose. Yeah, I'm fully aware of the carpet. So we're about to find out if this is really possible or not. And John's going to make it happen. I knew if I came to a church where we had a landscaper that was in the church, like the whole gardening thing, it would just work out. It would work out. Oh, there is a little bit of work. Okay. I wonder if we have a way to put a tea towel into that. Yeah.
We're going to find the tap head though.
Yeah, we already asked y'all what
it's all happening. You guys have had plenty of water around here in the past few months, haven't you? This has just become the most exciting message that you've ever experienced here at church. I guarantee it. We've got everybody involved. While they're getting the water situation sorted for us, I'll just explain to you a little bit about where we're going, okay? So this idea of tending to the garden of your inner life really came about because I, for most of my life, including most of my Christian life, have had a lot of things emphasized that I would refer to as kind of tending or maybe harvesting the forest of your external life. But I wasn't given a lot of training when it came to tending to the garden of my inner life. So let me explain what I mean by that. Much of my even upbringing was surrounded by emphasis on things that you did externally. So maybe my academics, or maybe even my athletics, the things that I was doing. But then even in the church world, I found that oftentimes our discipleship, or what people would refer to as kind of training in the Christian life, had a lot to do with external things. And so what I found myself at about 40, just younger than 40, I found myself realizing that most of what my Christian life emphasized was my... It's all... He can turn it off. This is really an exciting message.
You got a watering can. Put
the hole in the watering can there.
Oh yes, I do have a can. This was a great idea. It really was a great idea to begin with.
We're going to forget this message.
No, we'll never forget this. Everyone's going to walk away going, oh, I remember the message with the hose and the water.
Jason, are you teaching us to walk on water?
We will be, eventually. We're going to have everyone walk over the water before we're done today. Okay, I think we're going to be close now. Okay. All right, so really it was kind of this emphasis on what we were doing for Jesus rather than an emphasis on being with Jesus. And if you've been around Jesus teaching at all, you'll probably remember a famous line or a famous quote that he said when he said that, "I am the vine, you are the branches, and if you remain in me, you will bear much fruit." In other words, Jesus was really saying this, that if you focus on being with me, I'll take care of the doing for me. Whereas most of my life and most of my Christian experience has been focused more on the doing for Jesus and not so much the being with Jesus. So this idea of soul care, or this idea of tending to the garden of our inner life, is a way in which we can begin to understand what does it look like to allow our doing for Jesus to flow out of our being with Jesus. And the gardening tip that I want to give you today is, first of all, make sure you have hoses that don't leak. Okay, that's the first gardening tip. But the gardening tip I want to get to today, and I'll explain in just a moment, is one that I think is a major part of tending to the garden of your inner life. Before I get to that, though, I want to just kind of be a little bit vulnerable and be very transparent with you about something in my life. I have a disease, and my wife is familiar with it, but not everyone maybe in the room. I'd say nobody else in the room is probably familiar with this particular disease that I have, because I don't talk about it openly and vulnerably very often, especially in public settings like this. But it's a disease that I didn't know I had until later on in life. So I was probably not even aware of this until I was probably in my 30s. But looking back, once I discovered that I had it, I could see the symptoms of the disease all throughout my life, from even the youngest of ages. Probably 5 or 6 is probably the earliest time that I noticed this particular disease. The disease is actually right here. I'm going to have Leonie put it up on the screen. The disease is called moritis. Now, this is not technically a medical term. If we've got any doctors in the room, you may be like, I've never heard. But moritis is something I have struggled with, I still struggle with today. And here's what I am kind of convinced of. I think every single person in the room struggles with this at some level. I don't care how old you are or how young you are, whether you're a guy or a girl. Doesn't matter who you are, it doesn't even matter where you're at in your journey of faith. You could have been following Jesus your entire life, or maybe just exploring Jesus, or somewhere in between. All of us struggle with this thing called moritis. It shows up in my life all the time. I saw it yesterday multiple times show up in my life. In fact, a week ago, my wife and I, we went to a grocery store. You guys are familiar with Aldi's? We went to Aldi's because we've been told by friends they have the best pizza bases of any place that you can go to, apparently. So the first time we went into Aldi's, and we were going in just to get, I think it was 6 or 8, they come in packs of 2 pizza bases. So maybe 3 or 4 items total of these 2 packs of pizza bases. We got to the checkout. By then, we were only going in for pizza bases. By that point at the checkout, we had already picked up maybe 4 or 5 other things that we didn't even need. Then my wife and I saw right next to the checkout a whole bunch of food items from the United States. We've lived in the States for like 17 years, moved back about 3 years ago. A whole bunch of food items we don't normally see at grocery stores in Australia. Our 4 or 5 items, which by the way, we only went in, remember, just for the pizza bases, the 1 item, and then we added 4 or 5 items to that, then it went to about 20 items before we left the grocery store. We just went in for pizza bases, which were all of about $3 and something each pack. So we were getting out of there for less than 10 bucks. We walked out with a bill of over $40 because of moritis. And we all suffer from it. Whether it's at the grocery store, or maybe it's at a shoe store, maybe you struggle with it when you see vehicles, maybe for you it's more car, you'd like to have more car or more cars. Maybe you'd like to have more house. Maybe you'd just like to have more fun or more time. Maybe you'd like to have more relationships, or maybe you're a big social media person, you'd like to have more followers on fill in the blank social media platform. I don't know what it is that you struggle with, but all of us, I'm convinced, struggle with this idea of moritis. Now, This moritis thing, this idea, this concept, is actually something that was planted inside all of us by our Creator, by our designer. We all have moritis in us because we were created to have it. We were designed to have it. And it's not completely a bad thing. I oftentimes talk about moritis as if it's a negative thing, but it actually can be a positive thing if it's held in a healthy place, if it's kept in check. One of the wisest men, in fact, historians would still say he's perhaps the wisest man that ever lived, Solomon, third king of Israel, performed an experiment around this disease. He was trying to figure out the meaning of life. He was trying to figure out what in life would bring him purpose, pleasure, and meaning. Essentially, he was trying to figure out this idea of moritis. He spent his entire life. He had so much wealth, he had so much time, he had access to everything. He had access to more camels. If he wanted more camels, he would just say it, they'd get him more camels. If there was an ancient social media, ancient Instagram, if he wanted more followers, he'd just say it and they'd get him more followers. If he wanted more clothes, he could get more clothes. Didn't matter what he wanted more of, he could have all of it. More relationships, he had plenty of that. He came to the end of his life and he wrote about this experiment. You can read it all in the Bible, in the Old Testament, in the book of Ecclesiastes. It's a fascinating read on this experiment around this idea. Comes to the end of his life and he says that it's all futile, it's all in vain, except for the knowledge of the one who created us. And he talks about this idea of moritis, all of us being created with this built into us in Ecclesiastes. Read this up on the screen with me. You don't have to read it out loud. You can just follow along. Solomon writes these words. He has also planted eternity, this moritis, this desire for more, a sense of divine purpose in the human heart, which is kind of this mysterious longing which nothing under the sun can satisfy except God. So, moritis, in a sense, is actually something that God created inside all of us. And it's something that, if it's in a healthy place, can actually be the thing that causes you to realize, oh, there's something more to this life than just what I'm experiencing. That's essentially what Solomon discovered. Oh, there's something more than just more camels, more women, more relationships, more things, more whatever it is. There's something more to this life. That desire has been built into every single human's heart. And it can be a great thing if it's kept in check, if it's in a healthy place. Now, the great news is this, that God, knowing that He created and designed us with a desire for more, knew that if that's the case, then all of us would struggle with this desire for more, which, if you're like me, leads to a longer list of things to do. I don't know if you found this in your case, but if I want more home or if I want more of something, then I oftentimes find myself having to do more things. My to-do list gets longer and longer. And so right at the very beginning, we see in the creation story, Jesus actually created something that helps us to overcome this issue of moritis that all of us struggle with, which oftentimes leads to a very long to-do list in our life. I don't know if you've ever realized this, but your to-do list is never completely done. Have you ever noticed that there's always something else to put on the to-do list? Right as you get to the end of the to-do list, all of a sudden something pops into your mind and it's like, oh, I also need to get this. Oh, I also need to get this done. It's like the to-do list is never done. So Jesus created, in the creation story, kind of the antidote to this issue of moritis that we all struggle with. So if you have your Bible, I want to invite you, you can turn to the creation story. Most of you in the room, I'm pretty certain, are familiar with the creation story, but if you're not, I'm just going to summarize it really quickly. Genesis chapter 1 and 2, you can see all of it there, but up on the screen, just go through it really quickly. Day 1, God created light. Day 2, this is a summary, by the way, created the sky. There's a lot more to it than just like, oh yeah, just checked off the boxes. Land, sea, and plants, day 3. Sun, moon, and stars, day 4. Air and sea creatures, day 5. And then day 6, land creatures and you and me. Then Jesus created something on day 7. Game changer for Morites. Here's what he created. Day 7, God created rest. We were designed, just like gardens are designed to thrive because of the day and the night that God created, the dark and the light. Just like gardens thrive because of the seasons. Without the seasons, plants and gardens wouldn't thrive. Humanity thrives when we work off of the rhythms and the seasons that God created. The ancient Jews call this particular day, this concept that Jesus created, this rest, they call it Sabbath. Now, unfortunately, Sabbath has gotten a bad rap, and I'll tell you why. Unfortunately, the Jews took Sabbath, and instead of worshiping the person that created Sabbath, they began to worship the practice of Sabbath. They took it to an extreme. They took it from it's something that you get to do to something that you have to do, ought to do, and must do. But Jesus in the first century came along and changed the paradigm completely. After thousands of years of Jewish history where it was a must do, an ought to do, or an have to, Jesus in one summary statement, one line, game changer, changes the view of Sabbath for you and for me. Here's what Jesus wrote. Jesus said, I'll give you some context beforehand. Jesus has just finished a week of busy ministry, healing sick people, feeding people, even answering religious questions of all the religious leaders of the day. And he and his followers, his first disciples, they're walking along through a grain field as they're going from one village to another village. And this is what the writer Mark writes. He records for us on this particular day. It says this: one Sabbath, that's the 24-hour period of no paid or unpaid work that the Jewish people would practice every week because they thought they had to, must, and ought to. One Sabbath, Jesus was going through the grain fields. And as his disciples walked along, they began to pick some heads of grain. Huge mistake. Huge mistake. They're just walking along casually. You'd think, that's not a big deal. A guy reached out, just picked a head of grain. You'd think, not a big deal, but huge mistake. The Pharisees, religious leaders in the day, said to him, look, why are they doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath? Remember, the Jewish people had been given this gift by God in the beginning, in the creation story. Jesus creates rest. God invites them to every week follow this rhythm of working 6 days and then resting one day. They turned it into something that they worshipped. Instead of worshiping the person who gave them the gift, they started to worship the practice. That's why these Pharisees were so put off by what Jesus' followers were doing. Now, notice Jesus has a great response to their question. Why are they doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath? Jesus answers, have you never read what David? Now, remember, King David, second king of ancient Israel, these Pharisees, these Jewish leaders, would have thought very highly of King David. Jesus is incredibly wise. He's leveraging their respect for King David to really drive home this point. What David did when he and his companions were hungry and in need, in the days of Abiathar, the high priest, he entered the house of God and ate the consecrated bread, which is lawful only for priests to eat. So Jesus is setting all of this up. And on top of that, David also gave some to his companions. Then the summary statement of this entire conversation is the game changer when it comes to Sabbath. This is what Jesus went on to say. Then he said to them, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath. Here's what Jesus did in that singular statement. Jesus took Sabbath from an ought to, a have to, a must do, and he says, this is something you get to do. This is not something you have, must, or ought to. This is something that you get to do. This is a gift for you. See, God knew in the very beginning that moritis is built into our DNA. He knew that he created it so that we would have this desire for more to this life kind of thinking. There's got to be something more than just the life that we're experiencing. He also knew that this moritis, if kept unchecked, could destroy our lives. So he built in a rhythm of work and rest. Just like we have spring and summer and winter and autumn, we have rhythms of work and rest. So, let me ask you this question. What does it look like to take a Sabbath? What does that even look like? You might even be wondering, Jason, what does it even look like to take a Sabbath? I want to give you 2 questions today that I ask myself, and then I'm going to describe for you why we went to all the trouble of putting together this hose and so on. There are 2 questions that I ask myself when it comes to having a Sabbath each week. The first question is this: are the activities that I'm going to do during this 24-hour period of no paid or unpaid work, are the activities going to distract me and drain me during that period of time? Drain me physically and distract me from God's love for me or being able to just rejoice in his goodness in my life? Are they draining and are they distracting? The second question that I ask is this: will these activities be something that replenishes me and cause me to rejoice in God's goodness? So, this is a great time to just turn the water on just for a second. Can we do that? Is that okay? We'll do it quickly, I promise. And you know what we'll do, Daniel, if you don't mind standing at the door, I'll yell at you, and then you get to yell at your dad. How does that sound? You like yelling at your dad, okay? And I love yelling at you, so this works out great. So let me illustrate for you. When I think about activities during Sabbath, and I ask the question, there we go. What activities are replenishing? It's a lot like this garden hose. Right now, the water is flowing into the can, and it's incredibly life-giving. You can go ahead and turn it off now. We're about to flood the whole premises. So, just like the garden hose was filling up the watering can, there are certain activities in your life that are replenishing. They fill your life, okay? I'd love to hear from you guys right now. This is where you get to actually interact with the guy talking. What are some activities that you find incredibly replenishing that actually fill up your life? What's one activity that you find really replenishing? I'm going to pick up my wife while everybody else is thinking. I know some of the activities that you find replenishing. What's one of them?
Just stroll on the beach.
Walking, strolling, with no time commitments, strolling along the beach. Another one that's incredibly replenishing for my wife is listening to live music. So if you follow me or my wife on social media, you'll oftentimes find us somewhere during Sabbath where there is some live music being played, because you find that incredibly replenishing. I love watching live sports. So replenishing. Not on TV. I love going to games. So you'll find me sometimes going to a rugby league match on my Sabbath, or going and doing something where I get to watch live sports, because I find it so replenishing. How about somebody else? Something that you find incredibly replenishing. Something that just is life-giving for you.
Sleeping.
Sleeping? Yeah, resting. I like it, John. That's good. Anybody else?
Walking in the bush.
Walking in the bush. That's a great one. Anyone else?
Doing something creative.
Doing something creative? What would be an activity that's creative for you?
Drawing.
Drawing? Yep.
Dancing.
Dancing? Anyone else? Anybody love gardening? Just find it replenishing? Yeah? Some people do. That would definitely be unpaid and paid work for some people. For me, I find that so distracting and draining. So, each of us, when it comes to Sabbath, things are going to look different for every person. What's replenishing for one person may be draining for a different person. What's replenishing for my wife may not necessarily be replenishing for me.
Tell you right there, family.
That's a great question. So the other thing that we've done is we've actually created what we call a replenishment cycle, where we've invited each of our family members to describe or come up with 6 activities on this replenishment cycle. It's kind of a circle, and we can get that to Phil and email it out to people. It's a tool that we use with people that we do coaching and so on. We find the 6 activities that are most replenishing for that individual. Then we ask 2 more questions. What is the frequency and what's the duration of time that that person needs for that? So, for example, Kristen would say when it comes to listening to live music, a couple hours of live music twice a month would be really replenishing for her. She might say that once a month, getting to the beach and strolling down the beach for 3 or 4 hours would be something that's quite replenishing. And we put all of that onto the replenishment cycle. Then we look at that as a family and we start to find trends and patterns of things that are commonalities across the things that many of us in the family like to do. For our particular family, the beach happens to be one of those common things that we all find pretty replenishing. So we try to build that into our Sabbath activities. So that's the first question. What's going to cause me to replenish and rejoice in God's goodness in my life? The second question is this: what's distracting or what's draining and distracts me from God's goodness in my life? If these plans were real, and we'll do this later on the service, I would tip this out and just show you those kinds of activities that are draining. As the water flows out of the can, it becomes less and less full of what is replenishing to that particular watering can or to your soul. As you pour it out, those are the activities that are really draining and can be a distraction from God's goodness in your life. So, as we wrap up today, here's what I want to challenge each of you to consider doing. I remember the first time somebody said to me, Jason, you should really consider building in a rhythm of weekly Sabbath in your life. I remember saying to them, you have no idea what my life is like. It would be impossible for me to take a full 24-hour period off of any paid or unpaid work. I've got far too many things to do around my house to be able to do that. So then they challenged me. They said, Jason, is it possible that you could take just 4 hours to Sabbath once a week? And then maybe the next week, double that and take 8 hours during your second week. And maybe the third week you could take maybe 16 hours or maybe 12 hours. And then the last week of the month, maybe you could try that 24-hour period of time. For me, it was a great way to begin the practice of a weekly Sabbath, a weekly 24-hour period of just tending to the garden of my inner life. I had this quote shared with me as I was first beginning this practice that has just really stuck out to me. And a friend of mine said this. He said, if you don't take a Sabbath, the Sabbath will eventually take you. What he meant by that was this: we are all built for these rhythms of work and rest. And if we don't live within those rhythms, eventually your body, your emotions, maybe your spiritual life will force you to take a Sabbath. If you don't take a Sabbath, the Sabbath will take you. I want to finish this morning by just sharing with you a great quote about Sabbath, and I want to read it for you so I get it just right. This comes from a guy named Wayne Muller. He says these words about Sabbath. Sabbath requires surrender. If we only stop when we are finished with all our work, we will never stop, because our work is never completely done. If we refuse to rest until we are finished, we will never rest until we die. Sabbath dissolves the artificial urgency of our days because it liberates us from the need to be finished. I love that. If we never rest, we will never rest until we die. If we never stop, we'll never stop because our work is never completely done. My wife and I have started to Sabbath every week. We've been doing it probably now for 5 or 6 years. We happen to choose Friday night through Saturday night as our 24-hour period, but that's because of the work, the type of work that I do and kind of the rhythms of our lives. It works well for us. Here's what I just want to remind you of from the words of Jesus. Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So I don't know what it's going to look like for you, but I'd love to help you discover what that looks like beyond even just this conversation we've had today. So if you'd be interested, I'd be interested in chatting with you more about it, maybe even beyond today, and helping you discover the gift and the beauty that Sabbath can be in your life. Let me pray for you. Father, thank you for this morning. Thank you for the way that you have preserved these ancient truths, these ancient stories in your word, the Bible. Thank you for the way that you've allowed us to have access to them so that we can discover the riches of these rhythms that you've created so that the garden of our inner lives can thrive and produce the fruit that you want to produce. And I pray that you would help each of us to discover what does that weekly rhythm of Sabbath look like for each of us, unique to our circumstances and unique to the way that you've designed and created us. And I pray this in Jesus' precious name. Amen. I'll pay the bill for the carpet.
All right, thank you, Jason, for sharing thoughts on Sabbathing, and I think